Hello, and thank you for joining today for the presentation titled Strategic Planning, a Surfacing Activity for the Development of an Expanding NIOSH Ag, Forestry, and Fishery Health and Safety Center. This is presented by the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. My name is Haaris Saqib, and on this project I was joined by Dr. Sebastian Galindo, Dr. Tracy Irani, Dr. Glenn Israel, Dr. David Diehl, and Cassandra Ward. And this presentation is for the online ISASH 2020 conference that is taking place online because of COVID-19. This project was also my master's field practicum, and this project took place in 2019. So in this talk today, we're going to look at the context of surfacing as a strategic learning activity. I will also introduce the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety, and we'll look at the conceptual framework for the project, the methods that were used, the results, and conclude with a discussion. So this surfacing activity takes the form of a strategic learning activity, which is a type of evaluation that seeks to understand the current strategies being utilized by an organization and to also consider what strategies may be useful for the future. And in this case, the strategic learning activity was used to prepare the center for its first funding reapplication. And the idea for this process took place in the evaluation core, which utilized a developmental evaluation approach to identify this opportunity. The Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety is, you could say, headquartered at the University of Florida, but made up also with 6 partner institutions in our region, which covers 6 states and 2 island territories. And together we address agriculture, forestry, and fishery health and safety challenges through research and outreach. And we're funded by the CDC, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And our center is made up with 5 cores, first being the administrative core, second the research core, which is made up by large research projects as well as smaller pilot projects, an outreach core to create and disseminate findings and resources, an emerging issues program which addresses emerging issues such as those that we're having today under COVID-19, and the evaluation core, which is where I am housed as a graduate research assistant, where we assist the center in monitoring and evaluation efforts. And here are some of the current research topics of our center. A lot of our work currently is focused on heat-related illness, as well as understanding pesticide stress and the combination of heat and pesticide stress in the kidney. And just one example of a pilot project is our pilot project looking at chronic back pain in seafood workers. On the right side, this photo of the tractor is a outreach product that was created in part with our outreach core, just to illustrate some of the work that we do. And this surfacing process plugs in for our center as we are coming to our first reapplication in 2021, and the surfacing process, which took place in 2019, is a step in a, as we'll see on the next slide, a kind of a strategic planning effort to prepare our organization and to improve for our next round of funding in its application. So looking at the conceptual framework of this process, it's divided into 2 sections. In section 1, we have the external stakeholders and internal stakeholders participating through interviews and surveys to collect data of their perceptions of our center, our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges, as well as just to understand the perceptions of external trends and developments and how they're changing. And step 2, the strategic issues identification process. I'll talk a little bit more about how this worked later, but for now, it's a process to refine some of the results that we that we had in part 1 to better make use of those results in terms of actionable items. And I'd like to draw your attention down to this arrow towards the bottom of the slide that says traditional strategic planning process, moving from left to right. So the surfacing process is made up here by the purple shapes, and this next part, the green part, was outside of the surfacing process, but it's to illustrate how the findings of this process can be utilized and are being utilized by the center to plan and fund for its reapplication. So in this part 1 data collection and analysis section, interviews and online surveys were conducted both internally and externally, and we included the external stakeholder to produce or move towards kind of a 360 view of our center. So not only looking at the center from the inside perspective and how we view things internally, but how do our stakeholders view us? What do they see as our strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for us? Things that we might not be able to see ourselves. So in total, we had 10 interviews conducted internally, 1 external interview, 15 online surveys internally, and 35 external surveys online. And this target diagram on the right with green and blue, you're welcome to pause the slide here if you like and to look at some of those questions that illustrate the types of questions and how we navigated this data collection process. Now let's discuss part 2, the strategic issues identification process. So building off of the primary data collection process that took place in part 1, now we had a SWOT table created, and we were able to share these results with 13 internal faculty and staff of the center. And we asked them to consider these results and then to produce what they see to be the most important strategic issues that our center is facing. And we also asked them to not only mention what the strategic issue is, but also to add what factors make this a strategic issue, and what are the anticipated outcomes if the issue goes on and persists. And with that feedback, which was conducted on an online survey, another thematic analysis was conducted, and we sought to identify the common strategic issues. And we shared these strategic issues with the center for the first time at our center-wide retreat in December of 2019. So now we can begin to discuss the results of the survey. And now we're looking at the SWOT table example. This is just one portion of the SWOT table. And I'll bring your attention to this red box at the top. And this is where externally we found respondents highlighting these or discussing these themes about our center, but our center did not discuss it for ourselves. And at the second red box, this is an area where we all discussed, or internally, externally, discussed topics and had similar views on them. So with the strategic issues process, now we had themes that highlighted shared views of strategic issues for our center. And what we did is we did a simple kind of analysis to then what's the opposite of a strategic issue is the progress, and we also tried to use the details that the respondents gave to highlight what progress might look like on these different strategic issues. So we call these strategic actionable themes. And here's a look at the results of our strategic actionable themes. And they were focused around the research program, the network, and center cohesion. And I'll just talk about the first two for each category. So in the research program, it was mentioned that, or the most common themes was that the role of the emerging issues program should be refined, and that we should channel surveillance and emerging issues programs into the research programming. For the network, we should strengthen the strategic identification and engagement of stakeholders in our area, and we should further develop our center image, focused on relevance, usefulness, value, trust, and belonging. And finally, in center cohesion, we should break our internal silos, disciplinary and philosophical, to promote integration across cores, programs, and projects, creating a shared identity. And finally, we should enhance the internal communication, accountability, and transparency of the center. So now that we have the narrative portion, the SWOT table, and the strategic actionable themes, our center is able to utilize these results into its informal and formal planning activities. And ultimately, when the center writes its reapplication in 2021. And additionally, it's important to point out that many of these results can be enacted upon immediately. Especially right now, we're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and our center focusing on health and safety is seeing a new set of challenges arise for our stakeholders, and this is a new opportunity for us to utilize these findings and then improve upon them. So for example, one thing that was pointed out was a lack of center cohesion. Well, maybe this new pandemic would be a way for us to go across lines that we haven't gone before, go across into collaborations that we haven't done before, and seek to come together as a center in new ways to improve. So now we can discuss a few different topics, and we can first start off with the topic of participation. Looking at external participation, the participation rate was quite low, about 8%. And this did limit the amount of perspective and variation that our study had, although we did have a wide variety of participant types, which was good, and also from different regions, and even outside of our own mandated region of 6 states and 2 island territories. Now this does present the opportunity for our center to search for and become creative and finding new ways of integrating with our stakeholders to hopefully boost our name amongst them and to ultimately boost participation in our studies and activities. Internally, just less than half of our center's faculty and staff participated through an interview and online survey, and all of the center cores were represented. However, there was a low participation rate amongst the research projects, and I think this is something for our center to consider for the future, to make sure that we do give adequate and make sure that we are involving our researchers into decision making, and to make sure that we are making a culture and an environment for them to feel like they are being heard and for the future planning of our center. And the strategic issues activity did have a strong response rate, about 85%, which was good. And that was a selected group of internal faculty and staff who have been highly involved with our center. And another topic for discussion is the longitudinal perspective. And this is really an opportunity for our center, I think, to continue to conduct these types of evaluations, strategic learning evaluations, so that we can tap into a longitudinal perspective of how perceptions of our center and trends in our environment and how our center is changing over time can be visualized. And that will just only help to strengthen our understanding of our center and to see and identify useful insights that we can enact upon and build upon. So thank you very much for tuning in today. A big thank you to the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety, the Master of Sustainable Development Practice Program, Center for Latin American Studies, Center for African Studies, and the Tropical Conservation and Development Program at the University of Florida. Please do not hesitate to reach out to the Southeastern Coastal Center Evaluation Corps or to me directly for any questions or comments. We'd be happy to hear from you, and my email is below.